All right, Kevin, here you go. You're live. Welcome to Future Testing.
Okay,
Thank you so much.
cool.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hopefully you can hear me now.
Yes, sir. You're good.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm absolutely thrilled to be invited to speak. I mean, what self-respecting testing geek does not want to be on the same bill as Andy Jones? No one, as far as so as it says on the slide, I'm Kevin Iron. I am a quality manager specialising in automation for the NatWest Group, and I'm going to talk to you about the right test at the right time, and a journey we've kind of been on, and probably I've been on throughout my career. And I think probably it all boils down to when we started to question what actually do we mean by quality, and does quality mean the same thing for everyone? And kind of, I guess we all think, well, yeah, quality does mean the same for everyone. But I think one thing that we realised, and I've realised over time, is actually it doesn't. And actually, what you start off with your view of quality can evolve or change. Maybe, for example, if you're kind of thinking, you're on a startup, you're on a fast page, and you're at a fast pace, and you've really got to get that MVP out. What does quality mean to you? Well, quality probably means I need this to be good enough to engage with my initial set of users, and preferably to put it in front of some venture capitalists, and they'll give me some money. And that evolves kind of over time as, hopefully your startup gets funded, and you kind of end up where the NatWest end of the scale, where actually businesses and people all over the UK and also other parts of the world depend upon our services. Then you probably have a very different vision of quality, but it kind of evolves over time. So in building the right test and identifying where you're going to spend your time doing your testing, it's probably good to have that view of what does quality mean to you in helping you to meet it. And this is what I kind of call the testing conundrum. So this is basically, you hear it all the time, probably over the water cooler, sometimes in meetings with key stakeholders, which is like going, do I have enough tests? Have I got all the right tests? What's my coverage? What does that mean even? Or on the other side going, oh, we have hundreds of tests. Okay, but how good are they? What are they telling me? Our tests take too long. Okay, well, what do you want to do about that? And how do you meet that risk? And basically, I figure what it all boils down to at the end of the day is, does my product meet or exceed the expectations of my customers? And if asked, can I prove it? And that, I suppose, is the essence of ourselves as testers is, yeah, it's great that you've done all this testing, but can you prove it? Can you prove that you've made good decisions in where you place your tests? Can you prove that, you've made every effort to ensure that this product goes out with the right level of quality? And so what are the tools there to kind of help us, really? So the testing pyramid has been has been well proven, and I think people have kind of tilted it in different ways. So I think I've seen a sideways testing pyramid, I've seen the testing funnel, but essentially it's trying to articulate where we want to find our problems, and we want to find our problems as early in the development cycle as possible. And where do we want to start testing? Well, we want to start testing right the second from as soon as someone commits the line of code, we want tests. And those tests can take various forms, as kind of you see on the right hand side. I probably won't labour the point, right, because I think everyone on this call's seen the testing pyramid or a version of it many times before. But it starts, even at build time with static analysis. I've lost track when I've been a developer of the number of times Lint, back in the days of Lint with C++, where I've spent hours and hours tracking down a bug only to find that there was a Lint warning telling me that was where it was. So I think static analysis is really, really valuable if you tune it the right way. And again, good unit testing, good practices in unit testing can help you far through to the massive end-to-end tests that we run against every release just to make sure that everything works before we send it to our customer, before we even ask our stakeholders or if we can send it out. We run all of those tests, all of those levels. So the testing pyramid's been around a long time, and I think it's great, but there are some issues kind of with it. And like any tool, I think if you take it verbatim, it probably doesn't help you as much as it could if you thought about the testing pyramid against what is it trying to tell you and what does that mean for testing as a specific activity. And I think some of the issues of the testing pyramid are not all tests are equal. Across all of that, every single test is not equivalent. So some tests have varying degrees of value. They come from different places in the life cycle, obviously from unit tests to component tests to contract testing, but also they have different roles. And I think one of the interesting things is identifying what it is you get out of those roles. So some of the tests will be there for discovery. So earlier on the way, you want to find out, does this work? What's broken? What happens if I push this button? But some tests will also be helping you to describe the behavior of the system. And those those might be equally valuable, or depending upon the audience, more valuable. Because I think, as we all know, and certainly in a more agile world, right, we spend a lot of time thinking about documentation. We need probably less documentation. We won't write documentation for documentation's sake, but actually one of the roles of tests are that they accurately describe what the system is supposed to do. So if you say, well, what does this system do? Then you could look at all the tests and it would tell you. And it would tell you which bits of it worked and which bits of it didn't. And so, and then that kind of feeds into the demonstration. I think as a bank, kind of, we might spend some time with auditors and they go, okay, well, show me this. Show me this particular piece of functionality working. And you go, okay, I can run these tests. That's fine. And I think, if you kind of, got some tooling in there, like visual testing tooling, you could literally, if you wanted to, take the visual testing tooling and go, look, here is a walkthrough of all the screens, how we navigate it, how we identify, our user journeys, and you can take a very nice walk through those and prove what the system is doing. And I think probably, I think testing is about investigation. It's not telling you, testers don't tell people whether or not to ship their product. Testers tell people and show people what is working and what it does not, and what where the limitations of the system are and where the known functionality of the system is at the current point in time. So I think if a test isn't telling you something that's new or something useful, then why have it? And I think sometimes, probably as testers, the hardest thing for us to do is sometimes, like, one, not write the test in the first place, or if we've already written it, do we really need to run it, or can we take that away if it's not telling us anything useful? I think that feeds also into the proliferation of tests. Some people say, I have hundreds and hundreds of tests, and it's kind of like, feel the width of this document. But if it's not telling you something useful, like the number of tests is not a measure of the quality of the system, for example. So, one of the things that kind of, through my career we've been, dealing with is, well, actually, I want all my tests to be meaningful, and I want to be able to sit there in a conversation with someone and show everyone the meaning of my tests. So some of the ways that kind of involving to make, to help us, realize the testing pyramid is, one, where's the risk? That, when you're building something, where's the risk of that? What, and I think as we sit there in Three Amigos, I mean, I certainly, think that Three Amigos is definitely one of the most useful practices in agile methodology. because we can all sit down together and we can all go, how risky is this? How confident are we? If we built it and if we run all the tests and all the tests pass, and you had to release this into production with someone else and you weren't there and you were going to bed, how well do you sleep? That's kind of how I articulate it. If I'm sleeping quite well, I'm sleeping like a baby because everything's going great, then I've got a really high confidence that I understand my risk. And I'm confident that in the testing that I have, that I've got the right balance of coverage. If probably you don't sleep so well, or you're absolutely keen, to be on a release because just in case something goes wrong, that's probably your subconscious telling you that you probably haven't got the tests in the right place. So don't repeat yourself is I think really, really useful, because as you go through the testing pyramid, right, we find modern software development practice. You've already done your static analysis on your code. It's met that level of quality. You've run the unit tests on that code, so you've got okay. Then traditionally we would do component tests either at the API level or through visual level as something like Test Cafe. And so those tests already exist. So when you get to the level of engagement where it slips out of the remit of being purely development and into test and quality, then why do those tests again? And I think there's no need to repeat those tests. You can build on them, because I think everyone we stand on the shoulders of giants is a really good maxim, and we stand on the foundations of quality that are being built by the developers, by the business analysts, and our product owners, in understanding that everything is built one on top of the other. And again, I think my view is there's no need to repeat anything unless it's giving you value, either by documentation or demonstration. Bad path testing. I think sometimes the further up we get, and especially with more UI centered tests, it's more and more difficult to do the bad path testing, and sometimes that falls between the cracks. And we need to articulate where the bad path testing is, and understand that the earlier on in the cycle and the further down the stack we go, the easier it is to reproduce those bad paths. If you're building a broad microservice-based architecture, what happens if one of those services goes down? Think about that. And again, I think advocate, think outside the box. Okay, this is our story, and they'll do our test, but don't be too blinkered on that in terms of, we challenge ourselves really to go, what else does that affect? And I know as testers, that's something where we add a lot of value, right? It's just like going, I know that thing, but that thing touches a lot of other areas. So what happens if I do something else? And I take the next step. It might not be covered in my user story, but what happens if I take that next step? How concerned should we be? And so this is kind of something that I've borrowed from another talk that I saw by a very excellent Ministry of Testing. And we're kind of looking for a way really to articulate what I was just saying. How do we know where the complexity of testing is? How do we know where the risks? And actually, this solution of doing task analysis is actually something that found real benefit. So again, if you kind of look at this is a really basic kind of login flow, for example, where you've got navigate, go to the page, and then there's a lot of other interactions that go on. And I log into my web page, and what happens? It goes wrong. And I get a page at the end over here that says, I'm sorry you couldn't log in. You think, great, that doesn't work. Tick, bug for me. And then you go to the bug, and if you're right, write a good bug writing practice tries to understand, well, what went on? Well, we don't know. All we know is we tried to log in with particular credentials that we thought were good, and something went wrong. And the something is actually what we really want to have, right? And this kind of articulates that not just, so we understand that this fails, but the knowledge as to why is below the top layer. And so actually a lot of the complexity of what we're trying to do here is hidden in either microservice layers or below. And so that tells you, I guess, or it certainly tells me, is actually I do need login tests at the visual layer, but also I probably need some tests lower down, because when they fail, I'm going to get more information out. And information out is really what we're all about as testers. And going through this exercise, on a per story basis, really does give you a good view of how things hang together. And then it helps you to articulate where I should be doing my testing. Okay, and so how do we articulate the value of doing our tests? So I've kind of broken it down here into 4 areas. Kind of, have we got good coverage of our risk? Do we have good coverage in terms of testing? So are we testing at the right layers? Have we got good coverage there? Because we might cover everything at the top high level layer, but if something went wrong, what information would that give us? And that feeds back, I think, into the testing pyramid, which is to say, if I test right at the end-to-end layer and something goes wrong, that is really expensive and really time-consuming for me to find that and what happens. I think one of the things that I aspire to with test automation is I might only ever get this error once, right? So you could run the test 10 times and it failed once, and you think, oh yeah, everything's fine. But you're really sure? Especially with really complex systems, there are many, many race conditions that you could get into that you might only see once. You might think, oh yeah, I could probably ignore that. But actually, if you build your automation in such a way that at the point of failure, you literally gather as much information as possible at the instant that it fails, then even if you can't reproduce it, you might have enough information to help the team to diagnose what happened. And then you can make an informed judgment of whether or not you need to investigate further. Or, whereas kind of with the top level, something goes wrong, I couldn't reproduce it, even with the same data, it doesn't possibly mean the bug didn't exist. It just means it might be really, really hard to find. And then you have to decide based on very little information what to do next. I think, and it all comes down to in terms of when you execute in the layers. So, at build time, unit tests, component tests, component integration tests, all through the test cycle, you're probably running more and more tests at higher and higher levels. And what you're then doing is saying, well, actually at these levels, how do we know that we've got value? How do we know that it's giving us something useful? How many bugs have we found? That sometimes is a really good indicator. Have I got past first time? So again, right, this depends upon a lot of the infrastructure that you have, as well as the complexity of the system. Is we aspire to build pass first time executions, so that we keep our environment stable, we keep everything locked down, we stop things around, and we effectively. So in our current situation with the teams here in CPB Digital, we have a defined operating window where only the tests are running to keep it to the stage of going. Actually, we know then that any errors are due to perturbation of the environment or interference with the environment are absolutely down to a minimum, so that we know that our tests are good and there's nothing affecting them that is within our control. So then we look and then we know the errors are. Again, I would say review tests to see if they're adding value. There's no shame in understand. you put tests in for good faith, but actually, are you getting out what you wanted to get from them? That's a question we continually ask ourselves. And so we've kind of devised this metric of, and it's probably very similar to a lot of the ways, I guess, many people in the audience will be thinking. But in terms of how risky is this thing that I'm about to do or about to test? And so we've broken it down into 4. So what's the impact of this going wrong? How bad is it if this breaks? And we've kind of got, potentially a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being absolutely catastrophic, through to, effectively 0, which is this is just a cosmetic issue, or it would be level 1. Then what's the complexity of the function or the journey that that we're looking at? So how complicated is the thing that we're trying to do? How likely is it to go wrong? So we've kind of taken a historical based approach, where risky areas are often identified by potentially how many defects you find. Certainly when I've been bug hunting, I find that bugs tend to cluster together. They like bugs like company. So you find if you find a few bugs, you're likely to find more. So you should focus your testing as well on those to find and identify them. And then how many other interactions are in fact? It's fine to say, well, this is medium complexity, it's got a medium impact. We're confident there's a low likelihood of failure, but then if it touches every single other point in your system, then the impact of that going wrong would naturally be higher because there are more interactions that are affected. And that, if you have a high number of interactions, that probably tells you that you should be looking at the interactions. If it's even if it's very, very simple, low likelihood of failure, low impact, but actually that's telling you probably the test should be focusing on interactions as much as anything else. And we then kind of combine this into a risk weighted score, so that gives us feedback into, we know we have a relative measure of how risky this is in terms of our product and in terms of our own vision of quality. So that justifies where we put the tests, and it helps us to articulate why we have the number of tests that we have at the level of testing that we have. So if you're changing just a microservice and there's no changes effectively to the front end or other microservices, then probably you should be spending a lot of your time writing tests around the microservices and the microservice interactions, and less time writing tests at the visual layer. Probably the existing tests at the visual layer might need to be updated in a minor way, but there'd be relatively few of them, and those where you should be running. And this kind of feeds in, I suppose, to picking the right test and using the right tool. Where for changes at the top level, so for example, in NatWest Group, we have a lot of brands. And we just want our brand identity is important to us. So we do, we've got an investment in visual testing to make sure that the look and feel is exactly right and that meets our own customers' expectations, in line with our own brand values. Again, I think the last time when I went to Selenium conference, the focus there was, do you know what? Maybe we should write fewer UI tests. And I definitely agree with that. I think, a component tests approach, an API first approach, then means that the long running UI tests, they should absolutely be focused, and you should know why you're running each and every one of them. And they shouldn't necessarily be duplicating a lot of things that happen in the layers below. That's, kind of our aspiration. And, and the right time, do you need to run all the tests all the time? Well, where can we focus on what's changed? What is the number of minimum tests that we need to validate so that we can get that feedback cycle as tight as possible? And fundamentally, are these tests adding any value? Am I getting out of running these tests what I want? And if you're not, maybe you should think about whether or not you need to run them all the time, or whether or not you need to run them at all. And that's something that we aspire to as part of a continuous review, where as basically scenarios arrive in, of course we update our automation suite, we execute it, we review, we either find bugs or we refine and adapt. And this is a continuous process. And some of that is that test that we used to have, because of new functionality, we don't need it anymore. So we're going to descope that from the pack. Also, tests with low, where they're adding less value and less value, we run those less often. We still run them if they're adding value, but instead of running them daily, overnight, we probably run them once a week. And then if they start failing, we then bump them back up the stack, and then they run every day. So, it's kind of important to participate in the team and review to ensure that you kind of have the right testing at the right level. And kind of, to circle back again, just as a final thought, because I love Jerry Springer. But, I think the important thing in the modern era, at the very least, is quality is a whole team responsibility. So, when we understand our own vision of what quality means to us and what our view of risk is, then we can make sure that we have effective, efficient testing. And thank you very much for listening.
Great session. Thank you so much, Kevin. Cool. All right. So we got a lot of questions. The first one I'm glad someone asked was, how do you know what other tests have been run? A question I always get asked, how do I know what tests the developers ran? So they said that multiple users develops their unit tests, component, API unit tests. How can you be aware of the existence of tests in other layers of the pyramid? Are there any tools or strategies you use to connect these tests together?
So I think the important thing is probably talk to each other. That's what I mean. So I think that's where we use Three Amigos, is where we all sit down, and as you review all the tests, you go, okay, it says here I need an automated test. Is that something the automated test team need to write, or is that something that already exists? And the developer might go, oh yeah, we have unit tests that cover that scenario. Or say, oh yeah, we've got component tests, or and so that's kind of where we do our talking. And at the very least, we look at some of the execution reports for some of the higher level tests to say, okay, what's been covered? But nothing beats just sitting down and talking to someone. Even remotely, right? Where you just say, actually, do you have a test that covers this, or do I need to write one? And often the answer is, yes, I've got a test for that, or I could really easily add a quick component test to test that scenario. Okay, thank you very much.
Nice. I actually took an image of this. It was the right test, and you had like a graph of it looks like I'm getting old. Browser, JavaScript, microservices, middle. Like, did you trace that out? Does that help locate where tests have already been done as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think once you have something that helps you visualize what's going on and where you have tests, it then helps everyone in that room to understand, where you might need to have tests. So, it's like going, oh yeah, okay. we realized we had a whole load of really quirky login scenarios, when actually, if you think at the visual testing, right, login is the thing that gets battered the most. Every single test logs in. So login is the most tested thing, but actually where we were kind of lacking was what happens if something goes wrong. And then we go, oh yeah, actually we've got unit level tests that will cover these scenarios as well.
Very cool. So we have another questions from Romero. They want to know, I've never heard of this term. Do you have an opinion on the testing pyramid versus the testing trophy?
I think, to be honest, it's all about information, and they're all tools. The testing pyramid, it started off being number one and the way to articulate testing strategy and automation, and is kind of fallen out of favor and out of love in favor of some more modern ways of thinking. But actually, it's just a tool for helping you to articulate, where should I spend my time doing the tests? Because we can't test everything. But I don't particularly have a favorite. I think, it all depends on your own view of quality. I know that's a politician's answer, but I think both of them have their merits. And if one of them, and if it speaks to you and it helps you to articulate how you're going about your testing, then I think that's a good thing.
Awesome. Next question's from Paul, and Paul wants to know, do you qualify bugs with a value, money value?
No. I think I guess the money value in the testing pyramid is a good way to articulate to stakeholders the value effectively, because what it's saying is a bug that takes you longer to find is more expensive to fix. Especially also, the later you find it in the cycle, if you find then you have to go back. If you find a bug inside your sprint, for example, it's really easy to fix because the developer's head is in the game, the team's head is in the game. It's easier. Whereas actually, if you wait until you finish your kind of regression cycle, and then everyone is kind of mentally switched to something else, that is expensive to get that back in. I think, probably assigning dollar values is probably counterproductive. I think it's more just a tool to say, the reason why we want to invest in testing earlier in the life cycle is because it actually works out to be cheaper in terms of time and effort.
Great answer. Ramiro has another question. They want to know, what test is more valuable? One that is closely coupled to the implementation, or one that is highly decoupled?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think, again, that probably depends on your view of quality. And sometimes the implementation ends up being the design. I think we've all been there, right, as engineers. But I think it definitely needs to be challenged. So I think you should always write the higher level tests to be decoupled from the implementation. It just says, maybe you say, when I make an international payment, for example, from my account to another customer's account, then basically what I'm expecting is that the payment will be processed successfully and the money will arrive safely and well and completely matching in the other person's account. Now, that's a decoupled test, but then some tests in there will know how that's implemented. So if you're doing it at an API level, that roughly translates to these API calls. There's no other way of doing it. So I think you need to be mindful in terms of bringing your test, not to take the implementation as as fact. is this doing what the high level requirement is telling us it should be doing? And then that might bring us back into the review cycle where we're going, oh, well, actually, how we've implemented it, does that make sense? And is that doing what we want it to do? And if the answer is, well, yes, actually, once we got into it, we realized the requirement has shifted slightly. Well, that's fine. Then we understand that the implementation effectively becomes the source of truth, and we update the requirement documentation to say that that is the case.
Nice. So another question is from Dave. Dave wants to know, any advice for a sole QA that is trying to get automation started at their company?
I would say the best thing is to get buy-in is to try it. I think, do a proof of concept. And then once, often, people say, well, I've got a lot of people doing all of these tests. Why do I need to automate it? And that might work for them. But then our goal, to be honest, is to get people doing things that people are good at and where people are adding real value. And that's often in areas of creativity, thinking outside the box, exploratory testing that, and also that's just more interesting and more motivating for people, is that they get something that's challenging and useful. And the thing that computers are good at is repetitive tasks. So I think if you've got something where you're repeating it over and over and over and over again, that's probably a good candidate for automation. I think if you started taking some of those and building the automation around those, then you would quickly see some value. If you just said, I don't know, take some smoke tests and go, okay, well, maybe I'll take 10, 20, 30 smoke tests that we do every single time, and that someone has to sit there at a computer bashing at a keyboard away. And then you go, okay, I'm going to take that away and I'm going to automate them. Just give me the time and space to do that. When you've implemented those tests, you can go, well, actually, it took me, I don't know, X number of time to do that. But every time you run it, I'm saving someone 2 or 3 days' work. Every single time. For the same benefit. And that person, instead of having to worry about smoke tests or whatever these tests are, they can be doing something else, like working on some new stuff, instead of having to continually go back over the old stuff again and again and again and again. So that would probably be my argument, is actually give me a chance. I'll prove it will work. I'll start with this, this well-defined set. And then after that, if you still don't think automation is right for you, then, fair enough. But I think probably they will like the fact that they, can get people to work on more interesting and more useful stuff.
Absolutely. Great advice. So next question is about Dames. We get this a lot as well. Questions I get asked a lot. Curious to get your opinion is, who do you think is responsible for writing and maintaining unit and API testing? Is it the responsibility of a developer or a tester? I used to work for a very dysfunctional company, and they thought, we don't write unit tests, we have QA for that. So don't know. Any thoughts on that?
I think I would say, without wishing to be rude, I think if any developer is saying don't write unit tests, I would say the 1990s would like their waterfall development approach back, please. I think we're all in this together. Hopefully everyone likes soccer. My favourite team is Liverpool, right? Do you think Steven Gerrard is a very happy person if he scores a hat-trick and Liverpool lose 5-3? No, he's not. Because actually, at the end of the day, the team's failed, even though you've performed stellar. So you may have done a great job, development team, but actually, the overall result of delivering something that has met the needs of our customers, we failed. And that is that's not one person's failure. That's not one team's failure. That's a collective failure. I think that's what I think that's what modern approaches are trying to aspire to, right? It's like, look, test your code. I suspect anyone not writing unit tests would be very anti running it against something like SonarQube, because I bet if you run it against SonarQube, you find a whole load of code crime. But I think where it goes above unit tests, sorry, to circle back to the question, is when you get to the API tests, there are some that will more naturally sit with where the developer is working at that time. And so it would be more efficient for them to do it, or for them to work with the tester to do those tests. Often, we might work side by side. So the tester might be developing the API tests, but sitting next door to a developer. And sometimes, right, the developer might just be really, really curious, and that's what we try and encourage is this code is open. Testers don't own the test code. We all own the test code. So if you want to go in there and add a test, or if you want to go in there and fix a test, then absolutely, here is the repository, go for it, please. And we kind of have, encourage that kind of, one team thinking.
Okay, great, Kevin. We have another question from Joanna. Joanna wants to know, I'm not clear about the Amigos meeting. Can you please let us know if a PO is able to discuss anything about testing?
I guess in the way that I've traditionally approached the 3 Amigos meeting, and I apologize to scrum.org if I've got this wrong, where you typically end up with either a representative of what would be the customer, so that would be your product owner or your BA, then someone from development, the people who are actually going to be building the thing, and then the tester. So, testers are user advocates, and so they're there. All three of them form part of the checks and balances. I know sometimes in organizations, and certainly in ours, there are challenges always in getting the PO, the product owner, to come to those meetings. But they should be talking about testing, because it means they care. If they're asking you meaningful questions, then they care. Instead of just going, just test all the stuff, test everything. If they care and they want to talk about test approach, then definitely that's a conversation you should be having, because I think you've got a really engaged PO there. At the end of the day, they're responsible effectively for that delivery. So, and it's good that they might understand, that actually it's not just about developing, it's not just about testing, or it's not just about having the right requirements. It's all combined together that will allow us to deliver something that does what we really want it to do.
Awesome. Another question. They keep coming in. You get a lot of questions. There's a lot of good insight here. So I don't know the name, but here the question here is, earlier you mentioned, I've read it indeed in the literature, that we must review, refactor, and eventually remove useless old tests. How do we understand which one are not to delete, I guess, the question.
I think can you map it to an existing requirement? Because often kind of how it's kind of manifest is you start off with a suite of tests, and then your product evolves over time. And, and as we're all really successful in delivering what we're doing, because we're all doing great testing, all doing great joined up development, and we understand our customer, right? So, but the product will evolve over time. It can't help but not, right? And sometimes there will be tests that are left behind because they are for functionality that no longer exists, or they're for functionality that is no longer, high value, or it's for functionality that really doesn't go wrong, and it hasn't had any change. So if you've got an area of your product where you haven't done a lot of change to it, it doesn't really interact with anything else, and you haven't seen a defect from running the whole suite of tests, do you need to run all of them all the time? And I think, the best advice that I've seen, is turn it off. Do a phased approach, turn off the tests. We grade our tests in terms of, high, medium, and low in terms of risk and severity weighting. So we can then say, well, if we want to look at the tests in a particular area where it's been stable for a long period of time, then we can just run only the high level tests. And if the high level tests start identifying problems, then we'll dial all the tests back up. And then that's a good way. And then sometimes you'll probably find that you haven't run the low level tests for ages, for forever, and you think, okay, well, if I'm not running them, we can take them away. The one thing that we do from a test automation perspective is we have very strict branches, and we follow a Git flow branching strategy. So every time we have a release, the tests are benchmarked at that release with a branch. So there's a release branch for all of our tests, so that if someone came back to me and said, hey, Kevin, could you run the test that we did for, release in 2019, release 4? I go, yeah, absolutely. And it's as simple, right, as pulling the right branch from TeamCity and hitting go. So then you've got that level of confidence that actually, if you ever needed to rerun them in the future, you could, because they're still in a branch. And then you can delete them from the main branch, safe in the knowledge that they're always there for, for historical purposes. And that just kind of gives you a bit more confidence to kind of hit the delete button.
All right. Next question's from Sam. Sam wants to know, what's your vision regarding shift left testing? Should it become kind of standard, or at least something to tend to? I think that's definitely where we're going as an industry. I think we've come to the realization that, first there was like the Selenium gold rush, where as soon as we realized we could automate all the UI stuff and all the button clicking, that's all we did. And then we ended up with hundreds of thousands of tests that take hours and hours and hours and hours to run. And they might not be adding as much value now in a modern microservice-based architecture. It was fine kind of when you had the massive behemoth black box and everything touched the outside. But actually, I think in the modern way of building applications, it's all microservices. So you're probably not getting as much value from doing the end-to-end stuff. So you should absolutely be moving left. So earlier in the cycle, and also, we've tried to join everything up. So our API tests help us with our UI tests. So we've built effectively, rather than having everything built in isolation, we have built a monorepo, which effectively has common methods for accessing every single microservice we have. So if any test wants to talk to a particular microservice, instead of writing that code again, we just pull it. We just go, no, that's fine. We've already done that. Just call it. And then that makes the shift left faster, because you don't have to write code. You only ever write new code. And if something goes wrong, you fix the code in one place and not in thousands of places. Because I think, with API testing, you tend to end up with a lot more tests. And so that's our aspiration, is that we shift everything left so that we can find the stuff that's wrong in the microservice layer and below faster in the cycle, so that in the UI layer, we're then, identifying bugs that are as a consequence of that layer and those interactions. And it helps us drill down onto the problem faster. Really great insight, Kevin. Everyone's loving it in the chat. Thank you so much for your time. We went a little bit over time, but thank you so much. Appreciate you. And hopefully we'll see you again at Future Testing.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thanks for listening.
Thanks. Cheers.